Hello, this is podcast 4 of a series of 6 that looks at Nazi racial policies from 1933 until 1939. So this one is focusing in on the Nuremberg Laws, which was passed in September 1935. We've just looked at Nazi policies to the Jews in the early years, and in the next two podcasts we'll be focusing in on the quiet years and then finishing with Kristallnacht 1938. Okay, so let's look at the Nuremberg Laws first of all. Just a quick reminder then, the previous podcast we looked at the early years, policies 1933 to 35, and the emphasis of Hitler's policies in the first 2 years as Chancellor was very much on separating Jews, on reducing them to being second-class citizens, on sending a clear message to them that they would be denied the normal rights of non-Jewish Germans. Basically, it's important to also to understand is that there wasn't really any organised violence against the Jews in these early years. Nazi policy, the violence that we tend to associate with Nazi policy towards the Jews, for example, the death camps and the concentration camps came later, and in particular during World War II. Even at this time in the early years, concentration camps were not really for Jews. Concentration camps were more for socialists and for communists. There were Jews in concentration camps, but not many, and the Jews were primarily Jews who were socialists or who were communists. So difficult times for Germany's Jews the early years, but on the whole they could carry on living their lives as long as they lived them separately from non-Jewish Germans. But we now move to the year September 1935 with the Nuremberg Laws, and this marks what we call a turning point. Okay, so just put that word there at the top, because that is a word which I think you should try to use in your answers when you're talking about Jewish policies, and in particular with the Nuremberg Laws. They were passed in September 1935. So I'm just writing that word turning point in for you. They were passed in September 1935. You can see on the photograph there what we call the Nuremberg Rallies. The Nuremberg Rallies were a key event in the Nazi calendar. Every year, every September, I mean, the Nazis had rallies all the time, but the centrepiece, the biggest rally, was at a German city called Nuremberg, and Hitler went there every September. You can see from that particular photograph, if you look at the crowds in the background, it literally goes on for miles. This was not a traditional rally in a football stadium. The Nuremberg rallies were held in a huge field outside the city of Nuremberg, and at its peak more than 1 million Germans would gather to hear Hitler give a speech. Now in September 1935, Hitler used the Nuremberg rally as the sort of focal point to deliver his a big speech about Jewish policy, where he announced a series of 3 laws that he had passed. So these laws were called the Nuremberg Laws, and there were 3 of these laws. Okay, so there's that key phrase. It was a turning point. It was the 15th of September 1935, so learn the date, 15th of September. It was the date when the Nuremberg Laws were issued, and the 3 laws were as follows. Okay, first of all, the first law, it removed citizenship away from the Jews. Okay, so effectively they could no longer have German passports. That meant they couldn't vote. Okay, so effectively what they now were unwanted guests in Germany. Okay, they were allowed to continue to live in Germany, but they had no more rights than, say, for example, holiday makers, visitors from abroad coming into Germany from abroad. In fact, worse than that, because they were defined as unwanted guests, not just guests, but they were unwanted guests. So they've lost their citizenship. The second law that was linked to that was they were not allowed to fly the German flag. Okay, so that was called the Flag Law. Again, they were not members of the national community, so they were outsiders in Hitler's view. What defined the members of the national community was that they were all good Germans, proud German people. The Jews were not Germans in Hitler's mind, so therefore they could not fly the German flag. The third law, and probably the most famous of the laws, was what was called the Law for the Protection of Blood and Honour. I won't write that down for you because my pen isn't working properly, as you can probably see. But if you can make sure you learn the full title of that law, it is more commonly called the Blood Law, but in an exam, if you can use the full title, that will impress an examiner. It was called the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honour. And basically what it said was that Jews could not marry or have sexual relations with Aryans. So this was a clear definition by law of Hitler's intentions, that Jewish blood was not to be mixed with non-Jewish blood. In other words, what Hitler wants from now on is any children that are born inside Germany, the offspring of good racially pure Germans, should not have Jewish blood mixed. So any form of mixed marriage was banned. Any form of sexual relationship between non-Jewish Germans and Jewish Germans was banned by law, punishable by law. So any Jew who broke that law could be arrested and sent to prison. Okay, the final bullet point there is the one I've already mentioned, that Jews were now unwanted guests in Germany. So what all this basically meant, the Nuremberg Laws, in a sense, drew a line in the sand. They clearly defined the rights of Jews. It clearly said you do not have the same rights as Germans any longer. Okay, you are not wanted in this country. You are no longer citizens. You can no longer marry or have sexual relations with Aryans. And so as a result, it put even more pressure on them to leave the country. Now, in the previous podcast, we looked at the map that showed the emigration, and that map showed the years 1933 to 38. So, for example, 102,000 Jews had left Germany to go to America by 1938. What the Nuremberg Laws did is they accelerated, they sped up the rate of emigration. Okay, so as I say, it was a clear turning point. Okay, a clear line has been drawn and defined. So a turning point is the key phrase you want to use in the exam. Okay, that's that. The fifth podcast, if you go on to that one now, looks at the so-called quiet years that followed on after the Nuremberg Laws, 1936 to 37. Thank you.